Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I was halfway through a craft IPA when my wife turned a toast into a performance. I'm Grant Ellison, 36, operations manager at a logistics firm in Phoenix. We were at her best friend's birthday, renovated warehouse downtown, string lights draped like constellations, a long farm table flanked by mismatched chairs, a DJ in the corner setting a groove that made everyone speak a little louder to be heard. I'd come straight from a 12-hour shift rerouting freight after a monsoon delay, still in my boots, still carrying the clean kind of fatigue that makes a drink taste earned. I didn't expect conflict. I expected cake, polite conversation, and an early exit. Instead, I watched the woman I married set me up as the punchline. It hadn't come out of nowhere. For weeks she'd been cooler around me, a temperature shift you only notice once you're already shivering. At small gatherings she started playfully correcting me. Dates that didn't matter, anecdotes I supposedly told wrong, the number on a contract she swore I exaggerated. It wasn't the facts, it was the look she gave the room as she did it, a tiny wince that invited everyone to laugh along at my expense. When I'd raise an eyebrow later, she'd say I was being sensitive, that it was harmless, that I should learn to take a joke. People who tell you a joke is harmless rarely tell it to themselves. Tonight she had an audience big enough to test the act. The birthday girl, Brenna, loved spectacle. She'd rented a neon sign that said, 30, flirty, thriving, and the guests treated it like a confessional backdrop. Phones were out. Stories were currency. My wife looked comfortable under that kind of attention. I noticed she'd chosen one of those sleek dresses that photographs well under warm bulbs, the kind that says I belong in this room. I caught the bartender checking her out. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt distance. We found seats halfway down the table. I made small talk with a guy who sold medical devices and a woman who managed 3 Pilates studios. Easy topics: traffic, summer heat, the stubborn economy. Across from me, my wife leaned into a cluster of her friends, trading the kind of half-whisper that's louder than open speech. Every few minutes she glanced at me, not to include me, but to measure me. I can tell the difference. You learn to win your job is to read timelines and troubleshoot what will break next. When it was time for toasts, a server started pouring Prosecco and the lights dimmed a notch. People stood up, one after another, to tell Brenna she was bright, brave, a force. It was pleasant. Then my wife rose with her glass held high, waited for a hush, and smiled like a headliner walking onto a stage she'd already sold out. She started kind enough, how Brenna had been there through job changes and apartment moves. Then the tone bent. "And thank you," she said, patting Brenna's shoulder, "for reminding me a woman doesn't have to settle for less than she deserves." Laughter surfaced lightly at first. It wasn't about me yet. It would be. She didn't look at me when she said, "Sometimes we marry men with potential." The crowd oohed, the way a crowd does when it smells blood but wants to pretend it's perfume. She listed fake examples in a rhythm that played to the room. The time I tried to fix the garbage disposal and flooded the cabinet never happened. The vacation I planned, where every reservation was wrong, one restaurant changed our table after a power outage, and we ate by candlelight, which she posted about for days. People laughed because the specifics sounded plausible, and the woman telling them was pretty, confident, and clearly enjoying herself. I watched the laughter, not the stories. Laughter always tells the truth. She pivoted to money next. "Grant tries his best," she said, "and maybe one day he'll catch up with the rest of us." Someone whistled. Someone else clinked a glass. I took a slow sip and felt the bubbles bite the back of my throat. I didn't interrupt. I've learned that speaking into a performance just feeds it. When someone wants an audience, give them the stage and take notes. The table leaned toward her. Across the way, the medical devices guy shot me a quick look, sympathy mixed with the relief of not being me. The Pilates manager kept smiling, the pleasant, careful smile of someone invested in the mood staying light. 2 of my wife's friends glanced at me like ornithologists observing a rare bird. I tried on several possible responses in my head, a joke of my own, a direct call-out, a quiet exit. Each felt like an argument dress rehearsed for the wrong play. I put the glass down and let my hands rest on either side of it, elbows off the table, posture easy. Control, not confusion. It didn't stop. She worked the room like she'd been practicing. "Be grateful," "You married up," she said, and let the line hang there like a chandelier. That's when the laughter turned. You can hear the edge on a crowd when it realizes something mean just tipped over into something memorable. Phones were out again. Not all to film. Some to text. I clocked who typed and who watched. Cataloging helps. It isn't petty, it's data. You need data when a marriage turns into a story someone else is telling. I looked at my wife, not as my wife, but as a person mid-performance. The tilt of her chin, the slight tremor in her glass, the way her eyes skipped over me when she delivered the sharper parts. This wasn't improvisation. This was a script from weeks of practice disguised as banter. People who say they're just teasing have usually been rehearsing. I thought about asking her to step outside. I thought about waiting for the cake and leaving without a word. I thought about the promise I made at a courthouse on a bright September afternoon, the way we laughed because our witnesses forgot pens and we had to borrow the clerk's. The memory didn't soften me, it steadied me. It reminded me I hadn't imagined the original version of us. That mattered, even now. What also mattered was the room. I'm not a man who judges himself by strangers, but I pay attention to environments. Work does that to you. You learn which pressure points cause a system to fail, which temperatures make steel expand. Tonight, the environment was louder than any sentence. The air had shifted into the kind of silence that forms around cruelty explained as entertainment. Some guests kept laughing because they were afraid to be the one who stopped. Others avoided my eyes because seeing me would make them complicit. A few looked directly at me, testing whether I'd flinch. I didn't. People confuse stillness with weakness. They forget how much strength it takes to stay seated. I let the toast finish. I even clinked my glass against the medical reps out of courtesy. Brenna hugged my wife, a careful, sideways hug, the kind you give a friend who just said something you don't want to own. The DJ nudged the volume up. Servers set down plates. Conversations restarted like engines after a stall. My wife sat with a shine in her smile and a glitter in her eyes that didn't reach me. She didn't look to see how I was taking it. That told me more than the jokes. In the past, I might have leaned over and made a private request. Hey, not cool, can we talk later? In the past, I might have tried to explain how the line between teasing and contempt is thin and once crossed is hard to uncross. Explanations are for people still negotiating terms. What settled in me as I lifted my glass again wasn't anger. It was a simple, final precision. Something was off, and not in the way that resolves itself after a good night's sleep. It was off in the way a foundation is off, microscopically at first, then enough to make doors stick and floors tilt. You don't shout at a foundation. You decide what you're going to build on it, or whether you're done pretending it can hold. I watched, listened, and filed. The night had revealed itself. I set my glass down and felt the tilt inside me click into place. I wasn't going to play the part she'd written. Not here. Not anywhere. And when I finally stood, it wouldn't be to argue. It would be to end the performance. Clean, quiet, and unforgettable. The room just didn't know it yet. The toast ended, but the performance didn't. Noise returned to the room in cautious waves, like people testing a cold pool with their toes. Servers slid plates into place, short ribs for most, a vegan tower of vegetables for the Pilates crowd. I picked up my fork, because that's what a calm man does, and because I wanted the room to see a calm man. My wife didn't sit so much as retake the stage. One hip on the chair, shoulders back, eyes scanning for her next line. She started small, which is how escalation hides inside manners. "How's the cute little promotion going?" she asked, voice bright enough to carry. Not a question, a setup. Someone across the table chuckled. I said it was going well and left it there. She didn't. "Maybe you can finally afford those nicer shoes," she added, eyes dipping to my boots. 3 people laughed outright this time, relieved to be given permission. The medical device rep glanced at his loafers, then away from me. I chewed, swallowed, and placed my fork down parallel to the knife. Deliberate movements keep you from saying the wrong thing. Her friends, the tight cluster that treats group chats like scripture, leaned in, emboldened by how easily the room bent toward cheap entertainment. One asked if I was allowed to buy a second round, stretching the word in a way that implied I was the one on a leash. The table laughed harder than the joke deserved. I lifted my glass and said I was an adult who knew when to stop. No heat, no sarcasm. They looked vaguely disappointed. Humiliation is more fun when the target wriggles. I spoke once, the way a foreman taps a pressure gauge. "What's going on with you?" My tone was even enough that a server looked up to check if I was serious, then kept moving. My wife tilted her head like I'd mispronounced a word in a language she only pretended to speak. "It's just teasing," she said. The smile after the sentence was the point, not the sentence. "If you can't handle banter, maybe you're not built for strong women." She aimed her eyes at the women around her like a reflexive applause sign. I didn't rise to it. "Is this about us?" I asked, quieter now. "Or about an audience?" She shrugged, already reaching for her phone. Dessert was coming, and nothing attracts a camera like sugar. She filmed the plates as they landed, the sparklers for Brenna's cake, the angle that thins a face and widens a crowd. Between takes, she flashed her screen to a friend at her shoulder and smirked. More fuel, less comfort. No one asked what I thought. That wasn't the point of tonight. The Pilates manager tried for a gentle pivot, asked me about monsoon season and freight delays, the safe territory where men are competent and no one has to pick a side. I gave her an answer precise enough to signal I wasn't wounded, general enough to keep my powder dry. The DJ slid into a remix that made the cutlery clatter a little. The room's energy tilted from celebratory to theatrical, that specific heat you feel when people sense a scene and want to be near it without becoming part of it. I felt it too, the pressure that tells a man to either swallow or explode. I chose the third option. Speak once more, carefully, then let the choice hang. When the cake arrived, my wife stood up again, as if the candlelight had been set expressly for her face. She put an arm around Brenna and launched into a mini-set about strong friendships and honesty, the kind that slides sideways into cruelty while still wearing a friendly dress. "We keep each other accountable," she said, and then she looked at me. "Some men think accountability is controlling. We know better." There it was, the thesis disguised as a toast, a subtext she wanted texted, recorded, saved. "Let's step outside," I said, just to her, low enough to be private but firm enough to be a real offer. She didn't look at me. "We're all friends here," she replied to the room, skipping past my olive branch to collect her laughs. The line landed. Phones lifted again. I watched a guy angle his camera so my reaction fit in the corner of his frame. I gave him nothing to edit. I kept my seat and let the waiter pour coffee. Across from me, the medical rep tried a nervous compliment about the venue. I returned it and asked him a specific question about his territory to give him a way out. People who didn't know me decided they did. That's how public tension works. Narratives sprout in the cracks. I heard snippets on my edges. "He's so quiet. He looks mad. Maybe that's just his face." I wasn't mad. I was measuring load before a controlled demolition. My wife scrolled through the footage she'd just taken, trimming and sweetening clips with the fluency of someone who knows what her audience wants to see. Her friend pointed to a frame and covered her mouth to laugh. The screen glowed on their faces like a campfire you're not invited to. I watched the behavior, not the pixels. If you accept people at the level of their performance, you'll always be surprised by their choices. Escalation never announces itself with trumpets. It accumulates. She took a swipe at my truck, big energy for small promotions, and the table warmed their hands over it. She corrected a story I told about my dad, inserting a detail that painted me as forgetful, then kissed the air in my direction as if that erased the dig. She led a tiny chorus of "ah" when I declined a second slice of cake, like my restraint was a character flaw. She whispered to another friend and then pretended it was about the frosting. None of it would make a headline on its own. Together it told the truth. She didn't want a husband tonight. She wanted an antagonist. I finished my coffee and asked the only question left that mattered to me. "Are you okay?" Not a trap, not a moral test, just a humane offer to step off the stage. She blinked like I'd missed the cue. "I'm great," she said, loud enough for the two tables behind us to hear. "I'm thriving." She held the word long enough to collect nods. I nodded too, once, the way a man acknowledges a weather report he can see by looking out the window. The room, for all its chatter, had gone quiet in the way that matters. People knew the balance had shifted and waited to see whether I'd tip the table. I let them wait. Pressure isn't an order, it's information. You act on information when the timing serves the objective, not the crowd. I reached for my wallet, set enough cash under my coffee cup to cover what I'd eaten, and straightened my jacket. Not to leave. Not yet. To signal to myself that I was done participating in the script. She noticed the motion and reached for one last line. Something about men who sulk when women shine. The Pilates manager winced, barely, then smoothed her face back to polite. The medical rep stared at his plate. My wife's friends waited for me to make their night memorable. I gave them stillness, which is the one thing they couldn't post. The pressure had done its job. It clarified, like heat under metal. I didn't need to shout, plead, or curate my own defense. I only needed one sentence, delivered once, at the moment of my choosing. The decision settled inside me with the weight of something simple and unavoidable. I sipped the last of my coffee and watched the candles burn down, the wax pooling into the shape of what comes next. I felt the decision settle the way steel cools. No rattle, no steam, just wait. There's a point in every operation where you stop troubleshooting and shut the system down. That was this. No more quiet redirects. No more courtesy laughs. I wasn't angry. I was finished. I pushed my chair back the width of a palm, stood without scraping a leg, and let the movement announce itself. A couple of heads turned. The DJ's track thumped on, but the conversation closest to us dimmed in that way people do when they anticipate a scene and don't want to be in it. I didn't lift a hand. I met my wife's eyes and watched her work through 3 expressions: confident, confused, then cautious. She rested her fingertips on the stem of her Prosecco like a woman bracing for a wave she hasn't admitted she sees. I kept my voice even, the same tone I use when I tell a driver to back to door 2. No rush, no drama, just the next instruction. Before you keep going, I said, tell them who Nate is and why our account paid for 2 breakfasts at the Riverside Hotel last Saturday. Silence doesn't crack, it drops. The room's sound fell straight down through the floor. A fork pinged somewhere and spun once. The sparkler in Brenna's cake fizzed out mid-spark like it remembered it owed someone an apology. I didn't add a single word to cushion hers. One sentence was the whole message, not accusation, not theory, just facts with the receipt date and the noun that mattered. Her first response was a laugh pitched half an octave too high, the reflex of a performer trying to keep the show alive. You're ridiculous, she said to the room more than to me, eyes flicking left and right for a sympathetic anchor. It was, she stopped. She had lines prepared for teasing, for my supposed insecurity, for the joke I wouldn't take. She didn't have lines for the word Riverside or the number of breakfasts. Specificity steals air. I reached into my inside pocket and set my phone face up on the table. Banking app open. Date. Vendor. 2 breakfasts, a bottle at 1:17 a.m. and valet. I didn't angle it like an exhibit. I let it sit where the candles could catch the numbers and anyone who felt entitled to our private life could see what they were applauding. My hand stayed visible. Calm isn't just voice, it's posture. Her friends went still in that careful way people do when they don't want to be tagged in the memory. The Pilates manager looked at the tablecloth. The medical devices rep looked at me, and then at his water, as if it had answers. Brenna took half a step toward my wife and stopped. You can't pull someone back onto a stage that just collapsed. It was a work thing, my wife said, but the words sounded like she was testing them for cracks. He's a colleague. We were planning an event. She reached for her phone, maybe to conjure a calendar invite, maybe to build a different reality. The hand that held the glass trembled. She tried for a smile and couldn't finish it. Tears pooled fast and hot, the kind that skip the throat and show up in the eyes like a confession your mouth won't make. I've seen equipment fail and crews panic. The worst thing you can do is add noise. The best thing you can do is stay simple. I let the silence hold until it was big enough to do the work for me. Then I gave her one more line, exactly as heavy as it needed to be and no heavier. Now live with it. Not thrown. Set down between us like the only thing left that wouldn't break under weight. She covered her face with one hand and said my name like a question that hoped there was still time to change what already happened. It didn't matter who Nate was to her in the story she was telling herself. It mattered who he was to the charges on our account and to the hotel staff who know how many place settings were at the breakfast table. When truth is simple, spin looks silly. Around us, chairs didn't squeak and no one coughed. People held still the way they do at the edge of a cliff, aware of gravity, aware of their feet. Someone near the bar muttered "damn" in a voice too soft to be theater. The server frozen beside me still held the coffee pot in mid-pour, a thin thread of liquid suspended like a wire. I tipped my cup a fraction so he could finish and whispered, "Thank you." He blinked himself back into his job, and moved on because work is what you do when you don't know what else to do. My wife tried again, this time smaller. Can we talk about this later? Her mascara had smudged under one eye. She wiped at it and made it worse. The instinct to protect kicked and went nowhere. Protection without respect is charity. I wasn't giving charity. I was returning ownership. This is me talking, I said, and left it there. No instructions. No bargaining. No exit sign disguised as empathy. She looked past me to her friends, to Brenna, to anyone who might hand her a line that would unsay the last 2 minutes. Nobody moved. A truth set calmly on a table weighs too much to be carried by a crowd. I slid my chair in, squared my jacket, and reached into my wallet. Enough cash to cover what I'd eaten, tip included, placed under the coffee saucer. I didn't fold it into a dramatic stack. Money, like words, can be loud on purpose or quiet on principle. I prefer quiet. I checked my pockets for my keys without patting myself down as if I'd lost something. I hadn't lost anything. I'd stopped pretending something was there. Brenna caught my eye, an apology in the look that wasn't for the cake or the room, but for how she'd let the tone drift until somebody else had to fix it. I nodded once. No grudge. Hostesses run vibes, but they don't author marriages. The DJ, reading what good DJs read, let the track fade and didn't cue another. The neon sign on the wall, 30, flirty, thriving, hummed like it was embarrassed to be invited. I turned to go. No speech. No warning shot over the bow. Just a man leaving a place where the story had ended. My wife said my name again, softer, and reached out like touch could rewind, but she didn't stand. That was the truest part. Even now, with the room watching and the lights making everything look staged, she stayed seated. Comfort can be a harder habit to break than lying. I walked the length of the table, boots steady on concrete, and felt the attention follow me like a spotlight I hadn't asked for and wouldn't need again. The door's push bar was cool under my palm. I don't perform for people who were just entertained by my humiliation 10 minutes earlier. Still, I felt the eyes. They weren't on her. They were on the man who didn't raise his voice and still changed the temperature of the room. The hallway smelled like citrus cleaner and a florist shop. Outside, the desert night had that wide, dry, quiet Phoenix gives you when the heat finally loosens its grip. I breathed once, deep, then again. The phone stayed in my pocket. There was nothing to explain by text, nothing to narrate for friends, nothing to post for strangers who would call my calm cold, because they don't know how much restraint costs. I took the stairs instead of the elevator and felt each landing like a checkpoint I'd cleared. At the curb, a rideshare driver lifted a hand, thinking I was his, and I shook my head. I wanted the walk. The city sounded normal again. Traffic, a distant siren, a laugh from a patio that wasn't ours. My mind didn't replay lines looking for better phrasing. One sentence was enough. It had to be. The whole point of being done playing is that you stop rehearsing the old script the second you set it down. Behind me, inside a loft with string lights and a sign that promised thriving, people would start to move again. They'd whisper, they'd agree with whoever spoke first, they'd decide what they'd always suspected, and they'd reroute their sympathy toward whoever made them feel safest in the retelling. That wasn't my work. My work, 12 words, placed right, was complete. The rest would fall where it needed to, and I didn't have to be there to watch gravity do what it always does. I walked 3 blocks before my phone remembered it was the center of other people's emergencies. When I finally turned the screen over, it was stacked. Texts from unknown numbers, a cluster from her, 2 missed calls from Brenna, and a handful of notifications tagged with my name from people I barely knew. I didn't respond. I booked a business hotel on Jefferson for 2 nights, paid in full, and let the automatic door close on whatever the loft was becoming. Her first message tried confidence. You misread everything. The next tried logistics. Come back and we'll talk. Then came the swing set, apology, blame, nostalgia, and thread in a loop. I didn't mean it like that. You embarrassed me. Remember Sedona? If you leave me like this, don't bother coming back. I watched the cadence change without touching the keyboard. You learn a lot about a person's plans when you stop playing your expected role in them. At 1:13 a.m. Brenna texted, not a speech, just, "Are you safe?" I told her yes. She asked if there was anything I needed removed from the group chat. I said no, and meant it. Let the witnesses sit with the unedited version before the tidy debrief. She sent one more message. I'm sorry I didn't shut it down sooner. and I believed her. Hosts manage vibes, they don't author decisions. Morning made her messages worse, the way daylight makes bad paint obvious. A wall of please answer stacked on top of you're overreacting. Then a photo of tear-tracked cheeks that once would have punched through my good sense. I kept the phone face down and made a list on hotel stationery. Pack essentials, pull statements, forward mail, schedule consults. List keep a man's hands busy while his spine makes up its mind. I didn't go home. I texted our neighbor to ask if she'd mind if I swung by with a police escort to collect basic things. She said yes and used the word witness twice like a woman who's seen enough. By noon, I had a week's worth of clothes, my work laptop, and my passport. I left the decor and the arguments where they lived. By 2, I'd found a furnished month-to-month off the canal, clean linens, quiet AC, no history in the walls. The leasing manager recognized my last name and said she was sorry in the way people are when they've already been briefed by the internet. I signed anyway. You can't unring a bell, but you can sleep somewhere it doesn't echo. In the afternoon, I drafted one message to my wife. It was short enough to fit in a single screenshot. We will communicate only to coordinate logistics. No discussions without a counselor or attorney present. Return fob for the SUV by Friday at 5 p.m. I'll be by Saturday with a mover for the rest of my things. I read it 3 times to remove every word that sounded like a feeling and hit send. She replied with 10 paragraphs. I didn't open them. Mutual friends sorted themselves fast. A couple of her people texted me airy paragraphs about compassion and context. I answered one. Compassion and boundaries aren't opposites. 2 of her friends, women who laughed too quickly last night, sent apologies without excuses. I accepted those. A quiet ping from the medical device rep landed mid-evening. For what it's worth, I saw what I saw. It wasn't a promise, just a record. Records matter. By dinner, the story had migrated. Someone clipped my one sentence and shipped it by DM with commentary attached. Strangers acted like they'd been there. Strangers always do. I didn't correct anyone. Every word you spend defending the obvious is a word you can't use building the next thing. My next thing was practical. I moved my recurring bills to a separate card, disabled autofill on the joint account, and routed my paycheck to the individual account I'd opened years ago for side projects. Not revenge, not punishment, just shutting a valve that had flooded the floor. Day 3, she tried the future tense. We can fix this if you stop making me the villain. The word if was the most honest thing she'd sent. Flat conditional, no ownership. I sent back the only line I intended to send about the past. I didn't make you anything. I stopped covering it. She typed for 5 minutes. The bubbles evaporated. Her friend group started shedding. One unfollowed her after spotting the Riverside tag. She forgot to hide on a story. Small digital rituals that mean more than words to people who live inside them. Another sent me a voice note she immediately deleted, then wrote, "You didn't deserve that." I didn't need the validation, but it told me the lie had cracked where it needed to, inside the circle that enabled it. Shame can be loud. Truth works quieter, like a leak you finally hear once the music stops. On Thursday, she showed up at my new place. She didn't know the code, but she knew the door. I met her outside on the sidewalk because thresholds define relationships better than arguments. Without makeup, she looked younger, which made the scene sadder, not safer. She reached for my sleeve. I stepped back half a shoe. "We talk with a third party," I said. She nodded, then shook her head, then tried to split the difference with a sob. She said Nate was nothing, a colleague, a mistake, an idea, a symptom, everything but a decision. I didn't argue. Arguing invents debate where there's evidence. When the tears didn't work, she tried heat. "You're destroying everything over one breakfast." I let the sentence sit next to the date, time, and bottle on the app and the toast she'd given in front of 30 people. "Everything," I said, "was already destroyed. You just made it public." She swayed, not from shock. She already knew, but from the absence of a cushion. That's what living with it looks like, gravity, felt. I sent her away with 2 new times. The slot our counselor could fit us for a boundary session, and the appointment window for the mover. She stood there long enough for the desert night to turn her shoulders cold, waiting for the man she knew to step back into the script. He didn't. She left, finally, not with a door slam, but with the soft hiss of someone learning to carry their own weight again. By Friday, HR had processed my beneficiary changes and my new mailing address. The woman at the window wished me well like a doctor after stitches. My team lead asked if I needed time off. I need predictability, I said, and took the early shift instead. Work is where problems obey physics. The messages kept coming, but slower now, like a storm moving off the map. People who watched last night's performance learned something about me I already knew. I don't fight in public. I don't plead in private. I set terms and keep them. The room had wanted fireworks. I gave it a power outage. Harder to film, easier to live with. Somewhere in that week, the versions of me she'd practiced against, the clown, the sulker, the man who needs coaching from the chorus, went quiet for good. In their place stood a man who writes one sentence, leaves a bill under a cup, and walks toward a life where respect isn't negotiated like a tip. Her game didn't just break down, it stopped being a game. Choices showed up as invoices with dates, vendors, and amounts. Now live with it wasn't a jab. It was the new accounting standard. She didn't stop messaging. She just changed dialects. For a few days the tone swung between pleading and philosophy. How marriages are complex, how people make mistakes, how what I did at the party was performative cruelty. I kept the thread muted and the boundaries simple. Scheduling, keys, bills. Anything else went unanswered. Silence isn't revenge, it's choosing what gets oxygen. The counselor could see us Thursday at noon. I arrived 5 minutes early and filled out the forms with the same pen I use at work. She came in late, eyes rimmed red, hands restless. The room was soft, low lamps, neutral fabric, a rug designed to forgive shoe prints. The counselor asked for ground rules. I said I had 3. No rewriting the scene at the party, no minimizing the hotel charges, no public drama going forward. My wife nodded at each and then tried to talk around them anyway, reaching for words like context, pressure, liminality. The counselor listened politely and then asked the only question that mattered. Do you take ownership? My wife looked at her lap and said, very quietly, not fully. That was the session. We rescheduled for 2 weeks we both knew would never arrive. I filed for legal separation the next morning and treated the forms like what they are, tools. Asset list, proposed division, temporary support, vehicle custody. Numbers are unemotional witnesses. I forwarded copies to the attorney and HR, set a reminder to switch insurance at month's end, and watched the dominoes fall in quiet rows. Utilities out of joint names, subscriptions canceled, locks rekeyed without ceremony. There's a steadiness in administration. It replaces the shaky hands of hurt with the steady hands of process. Mutual acquaintances kept doing their own math. The loudest apologists from the party went quiet online. A couple posted vaguely about privacy and healing. The Pilates manager sent a simple message. You were steady when it mattered. And I answered with one word. Thanks. The medical rep dropped off a business card at my building with a note on the back. If you need a witness for the timeline, I'm available. I put it in a folder without deciding whether I'd ever use it. People like to imagine the truth needs backup singers. Sometimes it just needs room. Work became a clean line again. I took the early shift and found peace in schedules that obey physics. Pallets move from A to B when forklifts show up at C. No subtext, no audience. My team noticed I was quieter and more efficient. No one asked why. The monsoon system returned on a Tuesday, and we rerouted trucks around a flooded underpass without a single call from upstairs. It felt good to finish a day and have the story of that day be, we did the job. Nate disappeared with the efficiency of a man who thought discretion was a blanket. He locked down his socials and asked to transfer to a different account. Her office knew anyway. Offices always do. HR asked her to take some time. She texted me that the reaction was disproportionate. I left it unread. Consequences are not cruelty, they're gravity. 2 weeks out, she tried a new approach. Nostalgia threaded with logistics. I drove past that coffee place where we planned our honeymoon. Can I pick up the winter coats on Sunday? I'm ready to fix this. I read the last one once and archived it. As the message slid away, another notification landed on top of it. The attorney's confirmation, retainer received, filings accepted, accounts noted, keys ready for pickup tomorrow. The timing wasn't poetic, it was practical. That's what this chapter was, replacing metaphor with mechanics. Mornings found a rhythm I hadn't had in years. I ran along the canal before sunrise, passing the same dog walkers and cyclists, learning to nod without explaining. Coffee tasted like coffee again, not like a truce. I called my brother on Saturdays and we talked about nothing. A busted alternator, a recipe, a minor league game we wanted to catch. The quiet mundanity of those calls felt like wealth. I hired a mover for the final retrieval. She wasn't there when we arrived. She'd left a neat row of my labeled boxes in the foyer and the fob on the console table beside a framed wedding photo face down. I didn't flip it over. The mover asked where I wanted the boxes. Storage, I said, and surprised myself by not adding, for now. Some objects are just objects again once you stop forcing them to be symbols. The house echoed as we left, a sound I used to associate with possibility and now recognize as absence doing honest work. People kept expecting a twist, a late-night reconciliation, an unguarded confession, an angry outburst I could be scolded for later. None arrived. Instead, there were small, uncinematic moments that added up to a life. Fixing a wobbly table leg in the sublet, buying the good sheets because sleep is not where you economize, deleting the photo folder without ceremony, updating the emergency contact form with my brother's name, and noticing the calm that followed seeing it in print. I didn't send out a statement. When asked directly, I offered the few facts that mattered. There was a pattern, there was a moment, there were receipts. Most people nodded and changed the subject. A couple kept pushing for color. I excused myself to refill water or take a call that wasn't coming. If the party taught me anything, it's that we train people in how to treat us by whether we let them make meals of us. A month after the loft, she sent one more message. I'm sorry. I'll do whatever it takes. I believed the first sentence. I left the second to her and her God. I didn't reply. Respect isn't restored by a pledge in a text bubble. It's rebuilt brick by brick over time. Neither of us had the right to demand from the other anymore. That isn't bitterness. It's arithmetic. If there's any justice here, it isn't cinematic. It's ironic. The same circle that laughed loudest at her jokes stopped inviting her to tell new ones. The people who'd clinked glasses at Married Up now ordered their wine without tagging her. Drama costs tips. On my nightstand now. A book I actually finish, a watch I wind at the same time each evening, a small dish for keys that belong only to doors I choose to open. I sleep with the window cracked to let the desert cool the room by 2 degrees. Some mornings I wake before the alarm and lay there cataloging the absence of weight on my chest. That, more than any paper filed or bill split, is the conclusion. She made a choice and lives with it. I made a different one. I'm not a better man in the eyes of strangers. I'm simply a man who won't negotiate his self-respect in exchange for peace that never arrives. People tell you to forgive and forget. I did something quieter. I remembered and moved on. Respect is not negotiable. It costs what it costs. I paid mine, in full, and walked forward without a receipt anyone else needs to read.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.